Some of you are on vacation, I can tell. But those of you who are on vacation didn't hear me say that, although they may be on Zoom. You never do know on that. As you well know, I've been doing this series, and it's really a collection of mini-series on various aspects of wisdom, looking at it through the lens of wisdom as a whole, and then looking at wisdom through the lens of Proverbs, and then the lens of Job, and then the Psalms, because there are indeed several wisdom psalms. And I'm going to do a special thing next week, though, before I move on to Ecclesiastes. I'm going to give you the 10th mark of a disciple, because I taught the 9 marks of a disciple some time ago. They're all available. You can see on the website there, and just go to the Friday morning study. But I added a 10th one, and that's the one I'm going to present to you next week. So, and it's going to be, I'll tell you what it has to do. It has to do with the natural world. And it has to do with perception. How do you delight in nature in such a way that you begin to see the glory of God in a way that how do you cultivate new eyes to see the glory of the natural world? And I really came to conclude that's a mark of a disciple, one who, like David and like the wisdom literature, looks at nature itself and how God revels in his created order when he asked Job a series of questions. So I've been, the last 2 years, I've been a paradigm shift for me, where the way I now see the world is a different way than I saw it before. I want to show you what I mean by that. So here we are then, we're going to be finishing this little connection on the wisdom psalms, and with them, I particularly focus on the theme of treating things according to their true value. Remember, the wisest thing you can do is to treat things according to their true value. The most foolish thing you can do then is to treat the temporal as if it were going to last forever, as most people do, and treat the eternal as if they can put it off until later in their life. And maybe then they'll think about that. But the longer you put it off, you diminish your capacity to even resonate or respond to it. You can't put it off that long. So decisions must be made. So I'm suggesting here then, the wisest thing we can do then is to treat the temporal as such. Hold it with a loose grip, but treat the eternal, which is not seen and it's not actually now in a way, as if it's more important. Faith is the assurance of what? Things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Hoped for means you don't have it yet. And it's invisible, which takes tremendous risk to pursue the unseen over the seen and the not yet over the now. Yet that's exactly what we're invited to do, because it doesn't take any faith to realize that we're all in an earth suit that's dying. As William Butler Yeats put it in his Sailing to Byzantium, the human condition can be described as sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. That's your condition. You're sick with desire, a desire that's so great that no earthbound felicity can ever sustain that awful weight. Only God can do that. And yet you're fastened to this dying animal, this mortality. That's a grim situation. And if death had the last word, then I'd be a nihilist. I'd basically say, what do I need this for? But we have a biblical perspective that teaches us, though, that all of this is designed to really prepare us in this world, and I call it a soul-forming world, for our eternal citizenship in God's family, in his kingdom rather, or our eternal condition as God's children adopted into his family forever. We're part of that. And so seeing it that way makes all the difference in the world. Well, we saw before, there's lists of wisdom psalms, though I would add Psalm 90. I don't know why it's not typically listed, because teach us the number of days that we may present to thee a heart of wisdom. Psalm 90 verse 12 should be, but that's it. And I then realized back in the 90s when I was writing a series on Psalms, and I realized 6 of the ones that I taught relate to these wisdom psalms. So I'm going to teach the last 2. I taught 1 and 19 before, and 37 and 73. So I want to teach 119 and 127. So I know that I wrote about 119 in September of 1991. So there it is, September of 1991. I feel as if I wrote that yesterday. It's a strange process here. The time, and we know this is true, your perception of time becomes more fluid. It goes faster and faster, and you're astonished by that. And but it's still, what I love about the scriptures is it's evergreen. It doesn't matter I wrote it that many decades ago. It's still as true now as it was when I wrote it, and so it is. This is an acrostic psalm, Psalm 119. It's a big psalm, as you know, 176 verses. We're not going to go through this whole psalm. I can promise you that. But it's an acrostic psalm. It's a beautiful structure, and it has then 22 stanzas corresponding to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So the first stanza, aleph, 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 8 times, and then bait, 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 like that. So the structure is that way. So if you look at a Bible then, usually most Bibles will actually show this. So if you go to Psalm 119, you'll see how it actually will show the aleph. You see there? So that's the first letter of the Hebrew. So the first 8 verses all begin with that letter. And then bait as the next 8 verses, and so it goes. That's the structure, then Gimel. You see the idea there? So those are the letters of the alphabet there. And what I'm choosing to do here is to select certain key components from this psalm that illustrate some real richness. What's intriguing about this psalm is it rings the changes on 8 synonyms for Scripture. Those 8 synonyms are law, precepts. Now I'm using the NASB, so that's how they're translated in the New American Standard Bible. Law, your precepts, your statutes, your word, your commandments, testimonies, judgments, and ordinances. In all but 3 of the 176 verses, and that's, I say, I leave it to you to figure out which 3. And I'm not going to tell you. It's an interesting exercise, but they're all but 3. That's significant. And it tells us about the moral beauty of God's truth, you see. And He loves truth. And I want you to be a lover of truth. I want you to be a lover of goodness. I want you to be a lover of beauty. You see, and when I think about the triunity of God, the Father, especially the goodness of the Father, the truth of the Son, and the beauty of the Holy Spirit. Now, all 3 participate in all 3, but that's particular emphases that we see. And so this is a theme then we see throughout this psalm. The full range of human emotions, this is what I love about the Psalter, is because it's, and as you know, it's set to music for a good reason. And so typically then you'll go back to the psalm and you'll see that they're set to music. Now, in this instance, it doesn't have it in the superscription, but almost certainly, as most of the other psalms were, to the choir director, or it would sometimes give the name of a tune that we don't really know what it was like, because we didn't have musical designations, notation. But it was played to music and often sung. Sometimes they had 2 choruses, antiphonal. And they did this. Why would they set it to music? Why do you think that Psalter was largely set to music? One, to remember it, but another is because music brings you below the surface of your emotions. You see, it brings you deeper down, because that's why I love to play music, great pieces of music, and meditate on Scripture at the same time. It brings you into that. And when you are going through grief, and I did this with some people who were going through grief and played certain pieces, they had the right words for what they were struggling with. They believed the right truths, but I knew in their heart of hearts they were angry or disappointed or unhappy because they couldn't make sense out of why their daughter was given this curse of a stage 4 glioblastoma. And so the Spirit guided in a magic evening where suddenly I realized we were going to go outside, but it was raining, so we went inside. There were 4 of us. And it was amazing. The Spirit prompted me, put on this piece of music for them. And I played that. And it changed the rules altogether about our discussion about their daughter, Erin. And then I played another and another. And it went on for a few hours. And at about 2 in the morning, when we were through, we came out of that. And the last text, the last music, was such that she said, I could live with this. You know, it was an amazing thing. So, but it brought them down into the roiling despair anger, depression, hurt that we all have sometimes but don't want to acknowledge. So that's part of the power of the Psalter, is being set to music like that, and why we do it that way. But at any rate, it's the full range of human emotions, from the depths of despair to the heights of joy. And therefore, these people they're willing to openly acknowledge their painful feelings before the Lord of pain, grief, and doubt, and you need to be doing that. Because when you're struggling with depression or any number of things that were setbacks in your life, that is what you want to do. Is find something that speaks to you in your heart of hearts, some music, and read the scriptures that are appropriate to that, and it can really be a balm for your soul. And we need to do that as well. And so, but going back to where we were, I say it's a relationship, not a solution. Christianity is not a religion of solutions. It's a relationship with the Savior. It is not a conquering of our problems, but a commitment to a person. And you need to hear that because, frankly, there's so many things that are going on, I know, in your life that you won't grasp, and I don't grasp in my life. So many things that happen. I can't figure out why. From the trivial to the profound. But there are things I can't answer. They raise questions. I don't have the answers. Why this happened? Why that? And I realized when I was studying Job, as you will recall, when we were talking about the book of Job, the main theme, my main takeaway there was this learning the secret of obeying the one we cannot understand. I promise you'll never understand him. You can never understand his ways. And the more I look at the natural world, the more astonished I become. I was just looking at the Krebs cycle, and that's something has to do with the mitochondrial matrix and complex chemistries that go on all the time, thousands of times a second throughout your body. Complex cycles. No way this whole complex structure could suddenly appear. It's all perfectly functional. And we can't understand the fringe of his ways, how he can do this, that, and the other. Do you suppose then if you can't understand the natural things, material world, you're going to understand the spiritual? That's why Jesus said to Nicodemus, if I spoke to you of natural things and you didn't understand, how would it be if I spoke to you of spiritual things? So you need to realize you're never going to understand the fringe of his ways. He's beyond that. But you can trust him as a father. And that is the whole mindset that we have here. So it is with the wisdom psalms then, treating things and understanding them according to the proper value that's accorded to them. So this is a theme that I want you to see. It's about trusting and loving a person rather than having some kind of solution. You do not come to him. Many people come to Christ, and they come to the cross perhaps because of disappointment or difficulty, and maybe that brings them to the point of vulnerability where they receive Christ and so forth. But really, at the end, you realize you're really getting into something that's beyond your comprehension. And here is a person, though, that you can go with him, and one who suffered as we did and understands what it's like, so that we can have someone that we can appeal to, a merciful and faithful high priest in times of difficulty. And so when I see this then, we realize we're committing ourselves to a person, and the more you know him, the more you begin to realize he can be trusted, you see, even in the darkest times of despair. And so getting to know him relationally, personally, experientially, and that is really the point of why we've been talking about these life-changing prayers, is because isn't that what these prayers are about? Are they not about knowing him, not just in your head? How are you to know him? In your heart. With the eyes of your heart, that you to know him personally, experientially, relationally, not just head knowledge. That's the occupational hazard of theologians. They fall in love with the theology, but don't know the Father, don't know God very well. They know things about God, they think. After all, didn't I get my degree at Dallas Theological Seminary? After all, it was called a Master of Theology. That's a joke. Nobody's a master of theology. You begin to realize only when you know how little you know. You have to know a certain amount, though, to realize how actually ignorant you are. It does take a certain amount of knowledge to realize now you begin to realize you don't know anything. And so it is with this as well. You're confronted with mystery, and yet, it is spiritual things are spiritually attained. Isn't it true? In 1 Corinthians, it tells us the things of God are spiritually appraised and understood. And so we put ourselves before God and we desire to know him and become like him in that respect. That becomes very powerful. So then I can trust him though I do not understand him. Then another component that I wanted to say on this, because I want to move, we don't have as much time as I'd like, but when we suffer, we're either going to view our circumstances in light of God's character and promises, or we're going to view God's character and promises in light of our circumstances. We've talked about that before, but you know those are your basic options. And what's the thing that never changes? God's character and promises never change. Your circumstances do. So it's not what happens to you, but what you do with what happens to you. It's not what happens in your life, but how you respond to those things. And do those things then draw you and drive you to dependence upon him in a deeper way? And so if you view God's character and promises in light of your changing circumstances, you're going to be on a spiritual roller coaster. You see, he's a great God when things are going well, but I'm not so sure if I can trust him when things are not. That is not a deep faith. You need to trust him in spite of appearances to the contrary. And you need to have such a formal, a grip on, and a commitment and a trust that it defies understanding, that you're trusting him in spite of appearances to the contrary, because then and only then will you realize your circumstances which change don't define God. God, who never changes, defines your vacillating circumstances. Very big difference. Because otherwise you'll become bitter rather than better. But you'll never be the same person after severe trials and suffering. You'll become either bitter or better. So these are just some things. And so obviously I argue there that we need to renew our minds and view our adversities through the lens of Scripture. And that's the real point of this. And the texts that I had in mind specifically for that are going to be these three verses, 67, 71, and 75. So let's just take a quick look at those in this psalm. So look at verse 67, first of all, and then 71 and 75. So 67 tells us, before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word. 71, it is good for me that I was afflicted, that I may learn your statutes. 75, I know, O Lord, that your judgments are righteous, and that in faithfulness you have afflicted me. Those are three powerful verses for your consideration, you see. So that's why I relate it to the issue of suffering and adversity. So much as I'd like to stay with that, I have to go on to the next one, which is going to be Psalm 127. And that was in September of 92. So I go back to the old reflections here and see if I can figure out where that would be, about here. Let me see. April 7th. I think I told you we're going to turn this into a book, all the back issues of reflections. So here, Psalm 127 is trusting our labors versus trusting the Lord. And so if I go to Psalm 127, again, we see very short psalm, and unlike this other, the one we were just looking at. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful laborers, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. Then he says, behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward, like arrows in the hand of a warrior. So are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies at the gate. Particularly in an agricultural economy, children were an asset in that respect. You see, it's a different mindset. You know, adolescence is a recent invention. And boredom is a recent invention, you see, let alone the addiction to a realm that doesn't even exist, the digital realm. And people I'm seeking to use, by the way, digital technologies to seduce people back to the analog world. If I can bring them back to the real world by using that, that's what I'll have them right where I want them. I want them to cultivate an apprehension of how much vastly more astonishing anything in the natural world is in comparison to anything we've ever been able to create on our own. And that's something that's so critical. So how do we see this then when he says then, Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And so here I say that, again, everything is a biblical perspective, and I talk about the phenomenon of compartmentalization. You're all familiar with that idea. We talked about this before, whereby you have Christ as a component of your life, but he's not the centrality, and that is a problem. So I think I have it here. Yes, the compartmentalized life is an interesting one, because the difference between a believer and an unbeliever sometimes is only that. That's not as it should be. What's the difference? There you see him, and there you don't. You see? What's wrong with that? He's only a compartment. He's only a component. He's not the central at all. And what will often happen then is, if he's not in the center, something will occupy the center. And of course, a centered life means that Christ is seen as the hub of the wheel, and all the other facets of your life, whether the friends, work, recreation, anything, finances, he's got to be the center. And then when that occurs, then we begin to see how we become people where this is then related to that, and everything relates to the hub of the wheel. And then when that happens, then he animates my relationships at work and all of that. So that's a mindset, really, then that you have to have. So this understanding, however, in the realities of life, he may be at the center at one point, but then suddenly work's in the center of your life, you see. Or perhaps it's your finances that's the center of your life. No, that's not the way it should be. Christ must be at the center of your life. And so that's the all important difference between one that sees it from that point of view and one who sees it from the other. And so going back to this concept then, we want to see that Christ is not just a component. So for some, he's present in their lives. For others, he's prominent. But what I want for you is for him to be preeminent. You see the difference? And so for him to, yeah, he's present, but he's only a part, almost on the side. Some, he's prominent, and he'll be more often in the center, but I want him for you to be the preeminent being, because everything done in and through him, that's going to last. And what we do as we abide in Christ will endure. So he's the central hub. And so the realization is to overcome the illusion that we're autonomous agents of our own destiny. We don't control anything. And this happens all the time. I keep having experiences, and I'm trying to figure out why it is. Jake and I talk about our experience when we were driving to St. Simon's Island. And he and I processed this actively for 5 hours, didn't we? Because we were our Waze told us we were going to get there at 4:30 in the afternoon. We arrived at 9:30 at night. Why did this happen? Because I was on 75, and it was a construction area, and it was a very rough area. Something was wrong. I mean, there was just a lot of junk in there. And evidently, my passenger front tire blew because something got into the thing. And so I realized I have to go 4 lanes of traffic. This was fun. Time's dilated and almost stopped as I'm trying to go, because I know I've got to get off the road so that we can get off of there. So we work our way over there. And then we put the donut on, but the donut only allows you to go 50 miles an hour. I'm going to go to St. Simon's Island. I think I need to change this. And so I had a call and found the nearest place. But of course, there was a queue. And I can't just buy the tire. And it would love to have bought the tire, but I'd need a machine that takes it off the rim and puts it back on. I don't have this machine. Therefore, we had no choice but to wait. And how do I process that? It was a trivial thing in a way, but it was a significant thing in another way. Because you see, it's not what happens to you, what you do with what happens to you, you see? And so as I came to conclude it, don't have the folly of asking why, because you're never going to understand. It was very clear with Job. The arrogance of trying to demand an explanation is nonsense. You're never going to get an understanding of God's full purposes and plan. But I did see 2 things that were real lessons for me. One is the actual physical experience of the fact that I'm not in control of anything. Now, we know that theoretically. Sometimes you need to be reminded of it. You don't control anything, not one moment. And it could have been that that nail or whatever it was that destroyed the tire. You see, we don't control much of anything at all. We have the illusion of control. So not to ask the why, but to realize it's an example. It's a life lesson that I can learn from that. Secondly, I need to be grateful. You see, the antidote to great anger is gratitude. I can't be angry when I'm being grateful. Now, how could you be grateful? Not because I enjoy the circumstances, but because I can be grateful that God has my best interests at heart, loves me, and that the things that really matter for eternity are there, you see. So being grateful, and also grateful that I have the freedom to even ride a car and be able to have all the comforts that we have and experience and take for granted, which people couldn't do in past civilizations and times. So it's a mindset. Why were we late? I don't know, but it all worked out, you see. Now, at least I got a little application for you from that exercise. So I'm milking it for all it's worth. But my point is that we don't control anything, but even your most careful plans, hold them with a loose grip. Because whatever we plan our ways, but the phrase is, man proposes, but God disposes, you see. So as it tells us in this particular idea, the mind of man plans his way, but the Lord So if I go really to this text, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Commit your works to the Lord, and your plans will be established. The mind of man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord, it will stand. And those proverbs illustrate this statement. Man proposes, but God disposes. You see, so you think you're going to do this, let the Spirit of God show you what's really He's got in store for you, because you don't know what your life is going to be like. Tomorrow you're a vapor. And so if the Lord wills, we shall live and also do this or that, is the mindset here. And we can no more determine our long-term prosperity than we can determine our long-term posterity. And that's part of the point, children, even that. I don't care what you try to do, you can't change those rules. And so at the end of the day then, as I argue, the Wisdom Psalm encourages us to inculcate complete and unflinching trust in the infinite and personal God who created us, who redeemed us, and who cares for us. This is the one who gives you a purpose. He gives you a future. He gives you a hope. So the underlying issue, as I say, is, will I pursue my own plans or God's plans? And I got to be honest with you, I'm always pursuing my plans. And then I have to realize, no, my real job is to recalibrate my plans and bring them aligned with His purposes. That's the whole point of really what prayer is about. Not a strategy session in which you tell God what your best interests look like and then give Him generous suggestions as to how and when to actually bring it about and solving the problem. No. True prayer is reorienting my will with His. And then as the day progresses, recalibrate and let loose of my fondly held agenda and realizing that God did something else instead. Otherwise, you're going to make the blunder of making your joy dependent upon an outcome of your own invention that you can't control. That's a stupid way to live. You came up with this idea of what would be good. Then you ask God to baptize and bless your plans. The wiser thing is to recalibrate so that you discern what is His will and then bring your will in alignment with that. And that to me is a better way of seeing it. So trust in the Lord is active, it's not passive. You do your work with diligence and excellence rather than, as for Him rather than for men, and leave the results in His hands. And it always comes down to this whole concept here. You realize you can't control the opportunities in your life. That's God gives you that. Nor can you control the outcomes. Your call and mine is to be faithful to the process and let loose of the ownership of the outcome. I can't control the outcome. So with that in mind then, I have these questions for you. Christianity is not a conquering of our problems, but a commitment to a person. That was a phrase I just used in one of those newsletters. How does that apply to you? You see, I want you to think about that. What is it? Are you seeking a solution, a problem solver, or are you seeking to know a person? And that is one mindset. Then secondly, when you suffer, how do you view your circumstances? Because you're either going to view them from a divine perspective or from a human perspective, you see. So even your circumstances will depend upon to whom do you look then? And do you entrust? And then third, how do you wrestle with your plans in light of God's plans? May I tell you this? I find that I consistently do not want what I need. God knows what I need, but it's very rarely what I want. And I'll let you process that. I was just talking with my quote table, my table is the Zoom group. And so effectively we're talking about C.S. Lewis's The Weight of Glory and that wonderful message. And then one thing led to another. But I was meditating on this truth here, that God's infinite word, which transcends our own comprehension, is what's known and manifested to all people. But then in his special revelation, the inspired word points beyond itself. Who does it point to consistently? Jesus spoke with them on the road to Emmaus, all the things concerning himself, beginning with Moses and all the prophets. It was all about him. So the inspired word points to the incarnate word. But then the amazing thought is the incarnate word is now the indwelling word. And that's why I was arguing that God does nothing apart from his Spirit, but his Spirit, the Spirit of God, uses the Word of God and the man of God to accomplish the purposes of God. You see, this is why in the book of Acts, no one comes to faith unless he uses a human agent. He chooses to do it this way. He could have done it much more directly and much more cleanly and more efficiently. It's really, the church is a messy grace, as it's been described. It's a messy grace, which means we're all flawed. And yet, he chooses to accomplish a purpose from people who were formerly opposed to him, and actually his enemies. Now, we who were formerly condemned criminals have become beloved children. It's an amazing thought. But that's a diversion there. We go back to here and to our questions. So go off of that and go to our questions. What insight do you want to share? Some thought that you had? Any aha moment or anything like that? Yes.
I'll just comment a little bit on our table's
Sure.
discussion. It is very hard for me, I'll be personal, as a man, to relinquish control over what goes on in my family to God.
Yeah. It is hard. But what you're really relinquishing is the illusion of control. You never were in control of anything. We controlled nothing. And that's what that whatever object was that destroyed my tire is just an object lesson for me. And the realization every day, you do not know what could happen. And even on your drive here, how do you know if you weren't actually in some very real danger, that some nutcase almost was looking at his phone and then almost hit you, but you don't even know that? How many times has God delivered you from things you don't even know about? And that's why, again, when you make your plans, hold them with a loose grip. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we're going to go to such and such a city, spend a year there, engage in business and make a profit. You don't even know what your life will be like. You're just a vapor. It appears for a short while, and then you're gone. No, instead you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live. How do you know you're going to be here for a year from now, let alone that you're going to do all that? So hold it with a loose grip and recalibrate according to the realities that God brings. And so when he brings it about, I then adjust myself, and this is his purpose. I must receive it, not because I like it. Remember what I said? What I need is rarely what I want. In fact, I'm not sure if I ever want what I need. And if you look at film or literature, what you find in the character arc will consistently be a person who was pursuing what he wanted, but because of adversity and setbacks, may actually develop in his character and discover what he needed. You see, And that is a far better insight, that God knows what you need. And so that's why I now have come to see that it's a consistent kenosis. Kenosis means emptying. And so to empty myself, what does Paul say? I die daily. Take up your cross daily and follow me. Unless a grain of wheat dies. And so what does this mean? Every day is a little mini deaths to your own aspirations, your own idea of what your best interests look like, and a recalibration in light of what the Father knows you need rather than what you want. So I hold them, and God knows our needs, our desires, and so forth. But at the same time, I don't pray for solutions. I pray for knowing Him and trusting Him and becoming the person He wants me to be, rather than that He changes my circumstances, because frankly, that would be a diminished prayer. Yes.
The word we discussed was surrender.
Surrender. Tell me what did you discuss about?
God's will.
Yes.
Accepting what is going on.
Right.
As though it is part of His plan.
Yeah.
Rather than what we want.
And it is. It's the whole idea of unconditional surrender to His purposes takes tremendous risk, because here you're trusting someone. Once again, you haven't seen Him yet. Yet it tells us in 1 Peter, although you haven't seen Him, you love Him. And though you cannot see Him now, but believe in Him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls. It's a beautiful picture then. You don't see Him, but wait till you see Him, you see. Then you'll realize that's what you've been looking for all your life. And you'll realize, no, that is our whole heart's desire. Now, if we can begin to train ourselves to long for what He wants for us, you see, that'd be the right heart to have. Instead of, then the surrender becomes an actual voluntary immersion in His mysterious purposes that I cannot know or claim to understand. That's really what it comes down to. You're dealing with one who loves you in incalculable ways. Yes?
At our age, it's much easier to look at this and look backwards and watch how we came through this maze and how He guided us.
Yeah.
What we need to do is talk to young people so they don't waste their lives and wait till they're 60, 70, 80
Yeah,
years old
right.
before they understand.
And that's what part of being a transgenerational agent is about, being an agent, a sage. When you reach a certain point, you're expected to become a sage, a person who takes wisdom, hard-earned. And remember, and I think Will Rogers put it best when he said, good decisions come through experience, and most of that comes from bad decisions. So we learn more from our setbacks and our failures than we do from our successes. But that's a hard-earned wisdom. You pay a dear price, and you don't want to just flimsily leave it to go and not relate to other people. That's why I'm working right now on a book on recalibrating, so that we can recalibrate and see, how am I being an agent in other people's lives, in my family and others, so that conveying this. But the reality is, we live and learn, but you learn and live. And it's best to learn and live, but there's going to be both and. But we're out of time.